guys, Dr. Burns here. We have reached our last section, which is on hypothesis testing for population means. So we're going to talk about how to conduct a hypothesis test to estimate a population mean. And the process is very similar, almost identical to what we did back in Chapter 8 when we were estimating population proportions. And I'm actually phrasing that wrong. I'm saying estimating population means and proportions. That would be a confidence interval. This is where we want to make decisions about a population mean. And that's what we're looking at in this section. So first of all, what are the hypotheses going to look like? What is the format? Well, it starts off the same way. We have the null hypothesis, H naught, and that looks like an A. Let me write that again. We've got the null hypothesis, H naught, and it's going to be, instead of P though, we're going to use mu. So mu equals some parameter that I want to compare it to. We'll call it mu naught for now. And then if it's a two-sided test, my alternative is going to be mu does not equal whatever number I'm comparing it to. If it's one-sided, it's going to be mu is, if it's a left-sided, it would be, well, if it's the null hypothesis, that's going to be equal to, right? That would be the same for all of them. The alternative is what would be different. Mu would be less than, and then the right-sided test would be mu is greater than, whatever number I'm comparing it to. So in the pictures you can see below what we're talking about. Remember, if it's a two-sided or two-tailed test, the two ends are your p-values. If it's a left-sided test, it would be shaded to the left, and if it's a right-sided test, it would be shaded to the right. Our steps for hypothesis testing are the same as they were earlier in the course. You're going to start by writing your hypotheses. Then you're going to prepare, choose your alpha level, your significance level, which is usually 5%. Calculate that test statistic if you need to, or have StatCrunch do it. Check the central limit theorem conditions, and then go ahead and do your computation. So remember, we'll use StatCrunch to get that p-value and then make a decision on whether or not to reject the null hypothesis and what does that mean in the context of the research question. To check the conditions for a hypothesis test, the central limit theorem has to still apply, and so that means that the sample has to be random and independent, as always, and the sample size has to be at least 25, just like it was in the previous section, or the population has to be normally distributed. So as long as these conditions are met, we are good to go to run our hypothesis test. Now, what does the test statistic look like? It's the same as it was in the previous section. We're talking about T, so T is equal to X bar minus mu naught divided by the estimated standard error. And remember that the estimated standard error is calculated using S divided by the square root of N, where S is the sample standard deviation and N is our sample size. As long as those conditions previously mentioned, as long as those conditions hold, then the test statistic will follow a T distribution with degrees of freedom that are equal to N minus 1. Now, most of this, you're not going to have to worry too much about all these little details. We're going to use StatCrunch to do these calculations. And then what I want us to focus on is how do we interpret that? And what does this mean? What conclusion would we make? As far as interpreting the p-value, same rules apply as what we had previously in Chapter 8. If our observed mean, so that would be X bar, if that's far away from what we expected mu naught, so if mu naught is what we expected, maybe X bar is like way down here, that means we will have a small p-value. And so as far as when to reject the null hypothesis, it still is based on that p-value. And if that p-value is small, that leads us generally to reject the null hypothesis, and we still compare it to our significance level. So we're still going to follow the same rules as we had earlier and use that to make our conclusions. Like I said, don't get too hung up on the calculations here. We'll use StatCrunch to help us with that. Let's focus on the interpretations, and we'll practice that tomorrow in class.